again, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. Can I start from the top of my screen? The one with the letter A is Ashley. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, sorry, struggling to unmute. Hi, how are you?
Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in Joburg.
Joburg. How is it? How is the weather?
Warming up.
Warming up? Same here, same here. We have Miriam. Hi, Miriam.
Hi, nice to meet you guys. I'm also next to Joburg. I'm in Maputo, Mozambique, and I'm with the Ford Foundation, G20. Yeah, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining. Next, we have Helen. Hi, Helen.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Helen. I'm joining from DRC in Goma. I work for TF Fund. Yeah.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Helen. Who's next here? Naum. I think Naum is from Nairobi or Samburu. Naum?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Naum Kemunto from Samburu. I'm currently in Marara, very cold, and it's a rainy afternoon. Glad that I'm here today for this session.
Welcome, welcome. Charles Msimbi, where are you today?
Hi. I'm in Lilongwe. So we have been okay.
Good stuff.
It's a
Nice
bit
to
warm
have you.
today.
Good stuff, good stuff. Virginia? Hi, Virginia. Can you hear us, Virginia? Or are you on mute? Okay, moving on to the ever-present Seppo.
Yes, Victor and Mutile and the crew. Happy to be joining. I'm joining from South Africa, right in the middle of the country. The temperatures are getting better this time. Yes, we have moved past the winter season. So the temperatures are improving, and I'm looking forward to the session this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay. Good stuff. Welcome back, Seppo. Murage? Hi, Murage. Where are you joining us from?
Hi and good afternoon. Murage, I'm joining you from Juba.
Juba, okay.
Juba, South Sudan.
Oh, Juba, sorry.
Yes.
Juba, Sudan.
Yeah.
Welcome. Amadi Alela, how are you and where are you joining us from?
Hi, good evening. This is Amadi. I'm joining from Nairobi, Kenya. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, thank you, Amadi. Tara, good afternoon. Where are you joining us from?
Hello, I'm here from Johannesburg, South Africa. First time joining. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you for joining. We seem to have a lot of participants from South Africa today. I'm trying to skip the stuff from Dot because I think I have an idea where they are.
And perhaps we can also slowly get started. It's 5
Sure.
past. All right, great. Thank you so much to everyone who is on the call today. It's a pleasure, as always, to have you with us as we reimagine social impact and development for Africa. My name is Mutile Mongo. I work with Development Dynamics and I lead Last Thursdays. For those who are new to Last Thursdays, this is our monthly and sometimes bi-monthly convening where we encourage peer-to-peer learning, we bring sector leaders, we bring enthusiasts together, and the idea is to really think about the challenges that we are facing on the continent as they continue to become more complex, more interconnected, and more difficult to figure out as an individual or as an entity. And so we have been running this program or convening series since last year. But particularly our session today is on networks and movements. This is the second of a series that we started last month. And the idea is to really think about collectivization. So how people organize for collective action. And we have a very interesting framework that we have been working on, and Maxi, who you see on screen, will be presenting that to us today. But without taking too much more time, I'll invite Victor, who will give us a more comprehensive recap of this session. Over to you, Victor.
So thank you, Mutile. As Mutile mentioned, last month we started on this network and movements section, and we talked about networks and how the networks are in action. Here, Mutile gave us an example of how Pope Leo XIV was elected. This was a structural analysis that actually the research had mapped out to be able to see the connections between the cardinals, and these cardinals are the ones who ended up voting, and they had actually predicted it correctly. So the networks actually proved to be right. We also delved into movements in action, and this was led by our 5 groups from our MBFSI cohort 3, and that is what I'll try and take you through. So please, next slide. So here we began by acknowledging that we cannot divorce ourselves from the effects of these inequalities, conflict, and the shrinking civil space that we are experiencing. So here we have to come together to be able to tackle all these issues that are not only in our continent, but across the world. Next one, please. So the first group was led by Triza, and the group presented to us about the Abba women revolts in Nigeria of 1929. So these women mobilized amongst themselves. They used councils that were called Mikiris. They used market association and kingship networks. They were not spontaneous, but rather they were eruption of pre-existing infrastructure. The challenges that we're facing actually ended up erupting on that day. And what is the relevance of this kind of revolt that happened in 1929 in Nigeria? It actually highlights the challenges that that the women of our era are actually facing, and they offer a blueprint that everybody else can be able to follow through. So here we really looked at what gets measured and what actually matters. So here we try to list what truly matters and what kind of movement metrics we'd like to see. And the metrics there you can see we're talking about collective power, we're talking about care-based organizing, as well as moral authority to be able to speak about some of these issues. The second group was led by Ajak from South Sudan, and Ajak and the group took us through the anti-apartheid movement. I don't think we need to say much about this. We all know what happened, but the lessons here that we want to learn from the apartheid movement is that movements are only sustained for as long as the problem exists. If there's a problem, the movement will always rally together. Ndaji from group 3 took us through a few examples of women coming together. And here we looked at Wangari Maathai in Kenya. We also looked at Ala Saleh from the Sudanese revolution. She's the lady who actually led the protest against President Omar al-Bashir. So Ndaji also on the group gave us these other 3 examples, which were from Zimbabwe. And the metrics here were food security, crop diversity, and community resilience. In Kenya, in referring to Wangari Maathai, we looked at metrics that actually matter, and these were actually ecological renewal, empowerment, and dignity and land healing. We also looked at Botswana, and in Botswana, the metrics here that we were looking for are cultural preservation, community income, and intergenerational knowledge transfer. These are more important than the other metrics that we might see. And then Eric from group 4 took us through the protests in Kenya that happened in 2024, 2025. And here we try to list, these are some of the traditional metrics versus the community metrics that we really want to look at. And you can see the comparison that in traditional metrics, we look at the arrests and the casualties, we look at the media mentions, we look at the protest turnout in numbers. Whereas maybe the the correct metrics would be preservation of dignity, narrative sovereignty, collective power, and authentic care. So group 5, here we looked at Charles Msimbi, quite soft-spoken, took us through the challenges, and maybe we had to put a question mark over the traditional funding models. And here, the challenges that we face, especially when it comes to movements that are being led by the youth. And we've seen that the youth are actually rising up and leading these movements. So here we have to be able to recognize that movements are not just responders to crisis, but as architects of new worlds. So actively, we want to be able to reimagine the futures that are rooted in justice and community care. I think there was Shiro. Are you still there? The presentation has gone off. Oops. Okay, thank you, Shiro. So group 5, this was the last group, and we've talked about that. So finally, after group 5, we have to look at the new ways of funding, of investing. What should we be looking at? So when it comes to funding, we should be looking at the funders should maybe focus on funding documentation, supporting that narrative sovereignty, and also looking at other models like unrestricted funding, and feminist funds. That is the last slide when it comes to a recap of what happened in the last Thursday. But now I want to move on to the next one, which will be, I'll ask you now to lean in, maybe get out your notebook, get your coffee or something to drink, because I'm going to invite our group CEO to take us through this spectrum that Motile was talking about, and it will highlight from entity to ecosystem. So I want to welcome Maxi at this point.
Thank you, Victor. And pressure. Grab some coffee. We're gonna have some nice conversation together. Perhaps for those who regularly join last Thursdays, the last time I spoke, there was a lot more hair on my head. In Africa, in our tribe especially, they say akili ni nywele, kila mtu yuko na yake, meaning brains is hair and everyone has theirs. So I'll try today to go just gently and slowly through this interesting what we are calling the spectrum of collective impact. I think it's clear for us that the world we are living in, so many things are happening all at the same time. The all at onceness of all of the challenges that we are facing, we cannot do it by ourselves. No one entity anywhere is capable to make any kind of actual systemic change. And it will require us to work together to solve the kinds of issues that we are seeing, be it the rising authoritarianism, be it the environmental degradation, the inequality, the injustice that keeps deepening. And with all of these issues, the one who suffers the most is actually the least oppressed. So before we even move to this, the question that we will be asking is, how can we who are already working in the social impact sector in development, how can we refashion ourselves to remain catalytic, not just relevant, but catalytic? And what are the leverage points that we can consider in collective action so that we push for the kind of transformation that we need to witness in our lifetimes, even in the midst of the chaos? And really, one of the answers lies in how we collectivize. How do we move from siloed entities into ecosystem? The diagram that you see here has it has descriptors across this spectrum, and we are going to take time today very intentionally, very slowly to look at the layers, the 6 layers from entities to communities to networks to COPs to movements and to the ecosystems. Each of these represent a different way that people organize, that people connect, and that people catalyze change. And I would love for you to already, as we go through this conversation, imagine yourself not in one, but in various ones of these layers. Imagine the work you do in the unit that you are in, or in the organization as an entity, or in a network that exists. But also, as a human being, imagine yourself in the community that you sort of have found yourself in, either by choice, by marriage, or by you found yourself in this by birth. And the other thing, even as we go through this, is think of it less of a ladder. I know these are concentric circles, and at first glance, our minds might be wired to think of them in a gradual way, and that's not bad at all. It's a framework for us to think, but consider it less of a ladder and more of a set of very fluid layers, because collectives shift. We overlap often, we fragment, we reform, and the boundaries between them, those white lines in between them, can become very permeable. And so allow us to go to the first one. So we will start with the one that's in the middle, and then we'll keep moving forward. Again, just for us to remember, it's entities, gets all the way to ecosystems. So you may ask, what are entities? The very simple definition of that is, this is the visible unit of effort. And that's sort of where all of us can find ourselves situated. It's either a single organization, a single project, a single program, a single initiative, a coalition secretariat, or even a fund, whether it could be formal, it could be informal. But the thing about it is that it has an identity, it has some assets, maybe some resources, some human capital, some financial capital. It has some sense of accountability and outputs. And a few of this, because I see a few of you who I know in different regards, there could be a country level Department of Health in Kenya that is piloting community health volunteers initiatives. That is an entity by itself. It could be Zizi Afrique Foundation that is convening partners around foundational numeracy in Kenya. That in of itself is an entity. It could be the treatment action campaign in South Africa that acts as an advocacy entity, or that health tech startup that you're building to bring about referral tools for primary care in Sudan, so where the reason we start off with this one is that as we too, as development dynamics, view ourselves as an entity in various forms. We are a think tank that is actively clarifying problems that our clients and partners are presenting, that is actively reframing narratives and actively surfacing those leverage points that others in this broader ecosystem would be. But we also, as an entity, have a do tank that's working on strategy components, and as an innovation lab, we are designing experiments and playbooks and minimal viable collaborations between entities, and hence why this particular convening that we have together. Or as an entity, we also are through tank that seeks to align capital with change or with practical pathways. And constantly, as that entity that is a through tank, we are constantly asking what's fundable now, and then what must be grown with time. So what you see written on screen is how entities move. At times, entities will move upwards into networks when an issue needs multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral, multi-pronged approaches or shared protocols or pool data. At times, it won't move upwards. You could just end up moving sideways into communities of practice. And this is very, from at least the people I can see that I know in this, we have seen where an entity comes in and then you find yourself either situated with others and you're exchanging learnings and you're mentioning what is it that you're learning together so that we can improve the art, the craft, the science of our work. And at times an entity can find itself moving into part of a movement. No one entity can be a movement by itself, but you can become part of a movement where if a policy window opens up or harm escalates, you find that you are there to shape narrative, to mobilize, to do more than just your initial project can do. And that's very powerful. But as we are thinking about entities, and I know that in our work every day, we are probably facing these kinds of things. The issue of power, who has the power? We have power as entities. We have some resources, people, we have money, there's infrastructure, there is a coordination system, there is relationships that we have, but we also have expertise. And I call this the voice of experience and lived experience and expertise, the technical credibility that shows we've been working the journey, and hence why we are this outfit that's doing this. But then there's also a power that is very inherent in do you hold the pen? Are you the pen holder, or are you the mic catcher that can set an agenda, that your brand is identified with particular quests? And all these power layers, they can skew collaboration if they're not consciously lateralized. And therefore, we think that in this kind of call that we are together as last Thursdays, for instance, it has been giving us now, I think this is episode almost 20, it's been giving us some practical signal checks that we can be on the lookout for in our entity. Some of those is, are we optimizing our outputs? Are we checking as an entity? We will be judged often by the outputs and deliverables that we sign up for or that we promise, and also importantly, our contribution to outcomes. Because again, at outcome level, an entity by itself cannot. You can only claim contribution, but not attribution to outcomes. You cannot shift behaviors. You cannot, as a single entity, shift policy or norms, but you probably will need to be in different kinds of MOUs or rethink how you set up your KPIs so that you track reciprocity, like what are we learning, how are we contributing to joint ventures, and that is really the idea of entities. So I'll pause there to drink some water before we move on to the next one in that spectrum, but let it just sink in what an entity is and what we are reflecting in, and just think of yourself and your entity in terms of how you could be moving up each of the components of the spectrum. And then now we'll move to communities. Now, of course, this is where belonging in our context, really, communities are the affinity groups that are bound by a sense of belonging or experience. We can talk about family groups, faith groups, youth clubs, women's chamas, parent associations, alumni, or groups that have a particular lived experience that is unique to them. Persons living with a specific disability or a specific gender or sexual or background identity, whatever. And in terms of purpose, as much as they can be together, communities are not explicitly often seeking to change systems. Some are by virtue, especially of lived experience, but they matter in the broader equation because communities in and of themselves, if you're in a church group or in your in a youth group, you sort of generate trust by the kind of routine patterns that you're doing, the care, the cadence, the rituals, the preconditions that there is no other, out of all of the spectrum, communities are the place where preconditions for scalable organizing exists, because communities are very resilient. We don't move out of being in our alumni group just like that. You know, we unless I don't know what level of abuse has happened, we don't move from our faith groups just as easy, or from you want to keep into your youth group or into your women's chama as much as possible. So in that way, they are very resilient. And often these are the groups that allow human beings and allow us in our everyday living, not even working, to be able to pivot with the different things that we are doing a little faster than even institutions can when shocks hit. And some people here, you're probably a parent, so you're probably in a parent group, or you're rallying around different things with your parent group. I've heard in a previous call someone talk about some community health volunteers in Uganda who meet together to just share tips and resources with each other, and they do this outside. They do this because they are community health volunteers, not because there is a structure that exists to bring them together. And you found your chama is probably supporting girls return to school after or post-pregnancy. These are sometimes not things that you are running as entities. These are just some things that evolve because we are a community of people who care. And the thing with communities is that there are some risks in terms of gatekeeping, in terms of burnout for unpaid leaders. And I was just having a conversation this past weekend with someone from in the education sector who was mentioning that at the front line of capacitating teachers in Kenya, it's very clear that they themselves as a community want to have a room and a voice where they can name their aims, they can codify their norms, they can translate some of what they are learning while teaching into some lightweight action. And somehow, maybe a group or an actual entity exists, but often communities are bottoms up. They just arise organically. And I think one of the things that a community, and we'll later on talk about a community of practice, and there's a difference between those, but often just the trust that comes from communities is what enables us to stay in touch with each other, to care for each other, and to bridge community concerns into policy tables. And so the question I have for you is, if you're in a community that's very passionate about something, how does that passion that is emergent or eminent from the group, how does that translate into policy change or into influencing change? So let's move now to networks. And networks really, we see networks as the connective tissue, a set of actors that's linked by relationships. Networks can be centralized or distributed. They can be dense, as you can tell in the image there, but then they can also be sparse. They often exist to lower participation barriers. You find that if you're an entity or you're a community, for you to participate in a broader pie, there are gatekeepers that we are talking about in the previous ones, but a network ensures that then the voice of the majority can be heard. We can increase the surface area for how we sense and how we mobilize rapid action. And we as development dynamics play the role of network facilitator in a number of localized and globally connected work or regionally cross-regional work. And we have seen that there are some key dynamics to watch out for. And they're the ones that I named on screen. The first one is often with networks, we are asking the question, are we bridging or are we bonding capital? Are we connecting across different differences or reinforcing our own cluster? And this causes us often as network facilitators to step back a bit and think, is any of what we are doing as an enabler or as a network facilitator, is it becoming an enabler or is it stopping or reinforcing clustering, or fragmentation? It's very, very important. And then also when we are thinking about power, we often have to really ask who is at the critical junctions of decisions. Who's there? Who's that at the entry point of a decision or a direction? But also, how can we ensure that there isn't redundancy, across the spectrum? There isn't repetition and redundancy, or the knowledge is not concentrated in just a few people. And the biggest task of this is how can we ensure that networks have an organic governance that is light, that is fair, that is transparent. And we've worked, for instance, with the DHCK in Kenya, that's the Digital Health Coalition of Kenya, a while back. And their mandate is to link up Ministry of Health, NGOs, startups, and donors contributing to equitable and affordable healthcare through digital frameworks. Similarly, we've also worked with the Zero Malaria County Coalition, where we've enabled some accelerators at county level with the aim of stitching between county plans and civil society leaders. What we currently recognize is, and our September edition, Light Up Impact, who will be talking at the end, we see that they are a network that nurtures early stage organizations and facilitate peer exchange across the region. And I'm just sharing these examples as some of the ones that we've interfaced with that have enabled us to also see more and more some of the role of network facilitation within relationships. It's often under-resourced. Its importance is often unsung and unhailed, but I must at this moment just speak to even the investors, the funders, the donors who could be in the room. It's important that we pay attention to just the graph to show who's connected, who's missing, and who's overly relied upon, how that particular component looks like, and to introduce and manage some simple protocols, such as how do we share data models together? What are our common rhythms? And how do we steward those common rhythms in a way that is healthy, in a way that is not extractive, in a way that is enabling for joint action and collective action. And that requires resourcing. And how do we also set up networks that can rapidly respond when disaster strikes or when a shock in the system happens. And therefore, a bit of the work that network facilitation does, or network weaving does, is to set up those minimum viable infrastructure points. At times, it's just a convening calendar. At times, it's here's our wows. We like to call them our wows at DD, which is our ways of working, or our POPs in a meeting, which is, here is the purpose of this meeting, here is the outcome that you're going to look for, but here is the process detailing that. It's some very simple things sometimes that could go could not be shared, but it's important for us to just see that networks could stall because of several reasons, and it's important that there is a neutral facilitator who's looking out for those reasons, such as over centralization, where everything has to run through one hub, such as just doing the normal mailing lists, that become like a zombie, or short cycles that funders can give that at times may end up killing trust. And therefore, as before we move to the COPs, I think if you're here and you're playing the role of you are a network or you are within a network, I think there are some signal checks that you may need to be tracking. Are the ties that you're weaving together, are they diverse? Are they reciprocal? Do we have reach? Do we have enhanced reach because we are in a network? Are we able to enter into government, into community, into market, and not just south to south, NGO to NGO learning? And then are we establishing good learning loops to test, to sense, to adapt what is visible in our work as a network? And are we also funding, defending, or what learning and adaptive learning as a deliverable, not as an output that is there, because that's what happens in networks. So we'll now move to communities of practice, which is where learning that changes practice happens at. I think the simplest way to define COPs is practitioner-led, practitioner-stewarded groups that exchange local, tacit, indigenous practice knowledge, and then enable a codification, like codifying tools and saying, I think in a collective, this tool would work best. They also are able to test interventions together and to iterate in jointness. And often this is not about my brand. This is about our craft. This is not about, and we'll see this in examples that I'll give. It's not about being identified with a community, a particular community. It is us coming together and saying, there is a lot that matters in the broader realm of systems change, because we need to be able to shift how we work, and influence practice at different stages. And one of the ones that I've been a part of, and I was a part of from its emergence, is what we call the HCD exchange. And from its origins through to the phases that it has gone through, our goal at the beginning was to develop a very bold industry shaping vision. And we really wanted to accelerate the development of a robust and effective and transparent human-centered design and reproductive health field, the combination of that at the nexus of HCD and SRHR. And we had a hypothesis that design thinking and human-centered design can strengthen the kind of reproductive health strategies and interventions and policies and help involve and reach many young people with appropriate and very practical solutions. And the objective that we had at the beginning was to advance this as an emergent field so that we can see stronger connections by the players and actors and grow the awareness, understanding, and confidence in design thinking for reproductive health work. And we put together this community of practice that had researchers, technicians, program developers, young people, did I say designers, funders, different personas who were all instrumental in building a democratized, mutualized, and localized field. And across our practice also as DD, we have been able to support various other communities of practice to curate evidence and lived experience and shape that. And we are doing that with a few other people and are happy to continue doing so, to shape what is lived experience from the ground into guides that others who are going to be in this field beyond now can come and use. They can come and this is a plug and play, or we can modify at a granular level, but collectively, this is what we can do. I think the example I was given with the numeracy national action team is teachers, researchers, edtech folks are on this, asking how can we align on what works in early grade mathematics, and that's a very good case study of like what an actual community of practice can grow to become. And the particular one I'm mentioning has really great potential. We've run design sprints to turn insights into prototypes, such as maybe this is, I came in as an entity, or in our network, this is what we do, but collectively, as we shape the field, we now have like, this is a standard referral form or a micro curriculum that we can use, or some practice notes that others coming after us, because we always have to remember that there'll always be turnover, there'll always be people who come after and inherit some of what we are doing. So how do we publish that, and not just in an AI format, but in actual practice sense? And we still continue contending with different questions about communities of practice, and we are students. So let's now move to movements, which is the fifth in that in that path. And in the simplest ways, movements are that long arc organizing that seeks to shift power, policy, and norms. Look at it from the lens that sees non-linear, because you cannot quite make a movement into black or white. It cannot be. It has distributed leadership. I think a fantastic example that in our movement building masterclass, Waithera shared, is for women who are in who are experiencing. I will skip that, because if I dare say it, I will probably be stoned for saying it correctly. But aging women are coming up to say, hey, I really do not care much. This is exactly how I look. And it started as one woman somewhere doing a small video in America somewhere. Then it blossomed and it became a very huge global movement with distributed leadership and country chapters within no time. Then often a movement has a very clear moral narrative. I think you've seen it in Kenya, for instance, with the Gen Z movement, that the moral narrative, we don't need to repeat it, is the number of terms or the rejection of particular stands and bills, and the calling out and refusal to cooperate with structures that do not edify the collective future that we are aspiring for. So with movements, really, there is quite a few forms of power to take into consideration. There is the narrative power. Who is actually shaping the narrative? Often, there is a pen holder. And that pen holder or that mic catcher is not someone at times that you can predetermine from the get-go. It is sometimes it's very emergent, just like with ecosystems that we look at next. But also there is what we call distributive power, withholding consent, coordinating around action. And just that we are talking about distributed leadership, it's also distributed power, because how a movement will show up in one part is very different from how a movement will show up in another. And therefore, even as we are maybe entities and we aspire somewhere at the back of our minds to grow one day to be a movement, person can really own the movement. When that happens, then that shifts. Because also movement is about the constituency, who are the breadth and the depth of the people ready to move with a particular ideology or with a particular moral narrative. And I can provide two quick reflections from some engagements we've had with movement. With one that we call Bili Now, we saw cross-border youth culture and SRHR organizing across West and East Africa. We were able to see this is the true essence of locally led, where Senegalese young people from Cote d'Ivoire, young people from Kenya and Uganda are coming together to exchange ideas and to grow what it would look like for them to be actual contributors to Agenda 2063, AU Agenda 2063, as brave youth champions. And we've seen some common traps with movements, one of which is becoming absorbed into programs, like the case I'm giving you where Bili Now was working. The funder, it needed some resources. So the funder for this was Planned Parenthood Global. Now, they've recently closed down. I think it's public news. But fortunately, what would have been a trap has ended up becoming a benefit, because an organization called Rahu in Uganda has chosen to absorb this and continue to run it. But then it shifts maybe from a movement into a program, because it can only happen in a particular setting with a limitation of resources. Again, that's to show us that you can go up the spectrum, you could also go down the spectrum, and it's not bad to do so, because some components of movement areas will require funding, and that funding will need to be put up as a program, or will need to run in a particular lens that is different. But there is a trap of fragmentation and for fractional disputes, which we see often happening with many, many movements. I think the most obvious ones we've seen with the Kenyan Gen Z protests, it gets there where it is now factions are disputing each other. I think in politics, that's the best place where you can see how if we study just Kenyan politics and we go to the, when we move from single party into multi-party democracy, where there would have been a win because there was such a movement, it ended up fragmenting, and the win ended up getting lost because there were different opposition voices that refused to unite together. And also, I think anyone who's part of a movement can attest to just how exhausting it can be, especially after peaks. Peaks are when a movement really peaks, the exhaustion that comes after that is something that we need to be aware of. And so as DD, just through as ourselves, through the kind of work that we've been doing over the last 6.5 years, we've managed to begin shaping movement literacy through the movement building masterclass, and we are almost finalizing on a curriculum that shows movement literacy inside institutions, so that as an institution that is in a movement, you're able to know how to partner well and in a way that is not extractive. We are learning, and we've learned how to prepare and offer some shared infrastructure, such as how to tell stories, how to do convenings, how to scaffold communication, and how to offer shared like glossaries that enable there to be better understanding and alignment of terms, how to better coordinate and have some shared pathways to change. The theories of change at a movement level are very different from the theories of change at an institution level or as an entity level. And so I guess the question for us is if you're involved in a movement, how are you protecting the safety, the security, the consent, and also the attribution when it comes to movements? And to further complicate it, now let's move to the last one, which is ecosystems. All the other 5 that we've spoken about up until this stage, entities, communities, networks, communities of practice, and movements, they all build up to this. They all build up to ecosystems, which are an interdependent web of actors, of incentives, of feedback loops across policy, market, community, culture, and knowledge. I've seen ecosystems are not founded. You cannot found an ecosystem. You cannot architecture it. They actually just emerge when actors keep interacting and iterating based on what they are seeing across the other five. And they matter very much. They matter so much in systemic change because it's only at an ecosystem level. And with my 45 years of life, I can tell you, there is no, out of the other five, for there to be actual systemic change, the collective action has got to have gotten to an ecosystem lens. The rest will influence and will play at different leverage points, but the true change will only come at an ecosystem level. That's where we will produce emergent priorities such as resilience, such as innovation, such as a rapid diffusion that no single one of the other five can manufacture whatsoever. Let me illustrate this further. The example I gave earlier with the Ministry of Health produces policy. The District Health Information System, what we call the DHIS, it provides the architecture and the rails for tracking the numbers. The community health volunteers and private innovators and telcos and donors and researchers, they are all loosely coordinated yet highly interdependent to create ecosystem level change at the digital health level. In the realms of climate and health nexus, we see early warning systems, public health, water and sanitation, humanitarian actors, local knowledge holders, all shaping how we can anticipate for climate change to affect and affect health. And so a few valuable contributions that we as DD target to make or to contribute as ecosystem stewards, because that's all we can be. No one can own an ecosystem. For us, we've learned that the art of systems practice and holding a systems map so that we can constantly track actors and flows and bottlenecks and feedbacks. And you can refer to a few of our previous last Thursdays for how we do this. We've had almost 4 or 5 conversations around systems practice. And I also would like to big up Wasafiri, who have actually a tool, a framework that they call systems craft that they are shaping. We've also, another way we see contribution as an ecosystem steward is to convene light governance structures, very light, very light. At times, the one thing that causes the transformational change not to happen is very fixated governance. And so we like to shape norms, we like to inform commons, to enable dispute resolution. We've done that with few coalitions that, like one that's called Catalysts, that is working towards reproductive health justice. And our pillar 3 work as an investment catalyst really is about aligning capital to outcomes in a way that changes the system. And so while the insights that we and others at the intersection of ecosystem support are still in early stage of insights, what we are signaling is this. Do we as ecosystem stewards, whoever else identifies as such in this space, are we enabling self-organizing? Are we enabling new ties without central permission? Is the feedback that we are receiving either positive or negative around policy, market demand, cultural uptake? is that reinforcing each other? And we are doing all of these 6 now, including this one, they all are important because we can move to the next screen, because they enable for us to get to systems change. And for us, what is systems change? All of the reason why anyone, I guess, would like to exist, whether as an entity, up, across, into contributing into an ecosystem, is so that there can be systemic change. And systems change is what you see on screen, is shifting mindsets, mental models, and programs to address underlying roots through very intentional processes and designs, such as taking a complex approach, living systems approach, or capability and capacity and processes, so that we can create outcomes that are different in terms of behavior change, in terms of resilience, in terms of bridging to a better tomorrow. It's also about changing patterns and underlying structures and ways of operating. It's about transforming dynamics and reconfiguring relationships. And this, if you're taking a screenshot, you can, but we'll also happily share the PDF for this afterwards. This continues to be an image that I guess all of us could be looking at to point to, where are we contributing to systems change? Where are we leveraging? Where are we contributing? Anything that we are doing, whether it's in education, whether it's in climate and health, whether it's in urbanization, whether it's in youth empowerment, in livelihoods, in gender, in human rights, whatever, all of what we are saying in that second category, in order to, that's where a lot of our efforts is. So it's about shifting, changing, and transforming these things. And they are hard, and they cannot be done by an entity. They can only be done in togetherness. So I will let this marinate for a second as I move into the last part of this. So there's an image that we've seen here. The reason we were sharing about the spectrum is that part of what we are learning is that there are some cross-cutting issues, especially regarding the transition between layers and managing power. And I just want to touch on a few. One of those is triggers to move. I would actually say not to move up, but just to move across that spectrum. One of those is shocks. Consider the impact of the COVID-19 in your part of the world, wherever it is that you are. You'll see that many small entities, be it clinics, be it NGOs, be it media, Ministry of Health, they suddenly had to band together into ad hoc networks to coordinate around messaging, to share on PPEs, to advocate, to request for funding. So you'll see that a shock often forces scaling up collaboration. And I'll have a question, the question that you see at the end. How do you seize a moment of shock? I think another shock example is at the beginning of this year when Trump announced that there'll be no more, there'll be a freeze on US aid. There all of a sudden arose the desire to collaborate and think different. So shocks are good. And I think the best innovations actually happen because of shocks. I think people fear shocks. I do not necessarily appreciate it, but I do not, I refuse to cow or shudder in the middle of shocks, because I think that's when there is, if you seize the moment properly, I think that's where you are able to steward whatever part you are in, whether it's an entity, a network, a community of practice, you're able to steward it better. And then the other way that can make movements move across is pattern recognition, where there are multiple actors that realize, wait a minute, we are running parallel projects on different things, youth skilling, malaria elimination, and then they choose to coalesce into a community of practice or a network in order to harmonize. And maybe please just go back to the previous one. And often where we play in ourselves is supporting to synthesize patterns in terms of what are these surfacing overlaps, what are the enabling collectives to transition from fragmentation into coordination. Then there's also the narrative moment. That's another reason for triggering, where you see public attention spiking, maybe because of like End Femicide KE, Black Lives Matter, those kind of moments, they demand that networks and communities rise into movements, and they require a shift from just technical dialogue or siloed pushes somewhere to actual public mobilization that brings everyone in. And the last thing I want to mention about just these triggers is that they're catalytic. They don't guarantee up to move that they don't guarantee movement up into the spectrum, but what they do is that they open the window of opportunity. And therefore the question I'm asking there is, how do you steward the moment responsibly? The other cross-cutting issue as we move, there's a particular reason why I chose this picture, because of the window. How do you recognize this as an open window and not a closed door? Because there's always a window in whichever trigger. So the next cross-cutting issue across all the entire spectrum is that there are some prerequisites, and largely those are just like, what's our minimum shared language? If people are using different vocabularies, for instance, one is saying SRHR, while another is saying family wellness or family planning, and another is calling it bodily autonomy. If we are all using different terms with different meanings, then we may not be able to fully move as one. And so a bit of the prerequisites for moving up and down the spectrum is, what glossary of terms, what common narratives are we having? That's the first hidden step. And then how are we having a common rhythm? Because without predictable spaces, such as a last Thursday's monthly call or an annual assembly or some WhatsApp check-ins, regardless of where you are in the spectrum, energy can start to leak. So the cadence itself, the cadence of moving and the rhythm, that in itself is infrastructure to allow either movement up and down the spectrum. And before moving to a new layer, I think the things you have to check is, do you have a common language? Do you have a common tongue? Do you have a drumbeat that you gather to? And do you at least have one person who is a bridge builder across different sectors, or who can open up doors to, who is the holder of trust capital, who can say, hey, where we are right now, we probably need to bring another sector or another person. And another cross-cutting issue is power stewardship. We can move on to the next slide. And here really here it's about the collaboration character. We found it's very useful to have explicit agreements about the roles, attribution, data sharing. Otherwise, the story of the lion, I can't remember that quote very well, will only be told by those ones who have the actual power. So larger entities by default tend to dominate. And that's why it's important to have issues like rotational facilitation, and then budgeting for maintenance, so that we funders and programs don't just pay for workshops, but not for the glue that will ensure that the results of the workshop actually stick together. The coordinators, the facilitators, the platforms, the ones who will marinate and make the relationships work. Without that, it becomes very hard. Youth networks fail because there's no budget to moderate programs around climate and health. will fail because there isn't coordination. Is not just about we have a coordinator. It's about actual purposeful insistence that there will be budget lines and activities for weaving and keeping the rhythm going in every work that is designed. And often we are talking about power stewardship here. Power is not at all neutral, you know, so the thing here is to ensure that we can steward it while designing agreements, while designing the programs, while designing the rhythms and the budgets that prevent us to drift into some form of decay or some form of dominance that we are not looking for. And then finally, the last cross-cutting issue is about measurements. And here, each of these five, each of these six, they're actually six, each layer requires a different compass. Entities will often be measuring outputs and things like costs per results. The question we'll probably be asking at an entity level, whether it's a project or an organization, is did it deliver X at X amount? And at this level, really, efficiency is what matters the most. At the community and network category, relationship quality and the time to collaborate, that's super, super important. How quickly can groups coordinate a joint statement on education or climate reform? Are there strong ties enough that there is going to be joint fundraising without any party feeling I am lost or I am not as highly valued? And then now when you move on to the community of practice here, the measures which will shift if you were previously at an entity or at a network, they'll shift here because the measure of a community of practice is how well are we adapting the practices and spreading the tools that we have, we can say are common tools. Are more schools adopting a new numeracy approach across counties? Are case studies in HCD and SRHR being used by peers, by funders, by researchers to build upon? And then now when you move to movements, the measurement here is even more different because here it's about narrative shifts and policy wins and protection of the gains that we have made. And the question here to ask is, for instance, recently did the End Femicide KE movement change public discourse on gender-based violence? Did the feminist lobby group in South Africa get a new budget line? And is it defended against reversal? You know, we've seen the opposite happen in perpetuity on different aspects. And so it's important to know that at a movement level, we should be able to measure narrative shifts, policy wins, and protection of these gains. But then at an ecosystem level, what we need to be looking out to measure for is resilience, is diffusion, is diversity, is how quickly, for instance, did public health, population health and emergencies ecosystem recover after COVID and then again after the donor freezes in late 2024, early 2025? Are solutions spreading across borders? How diverse are the actors across philanthropic, private, public, development, grassroots, shaping the system? If we are in this conversation looking for measurement, if we measure the wrong thing, we will strangle the collective. Remember, our conversation today is about collectivization. It's about collective action. So each layer has its own vital signs, from what we said about entities at cost per unit to system resilience at the ecosystem level. And if an entity, I think the last imagery I'd just like to give now is that if you see an entity as a seed, then the community is the soil, and the network is that mycelium that is put on it, with the COP becoming the gardener's handbook and a movement becoming the season's rains. and then the ecosystem now becoming the whole biome that we can see and celebrate the wins for. And moving between these layers is never automatic. I think we have said that it takes shock, opportunity. It also takes shared language, rhythms, bridges, power, stewardship, and it requires us to change the way we measure success as we scale from outputs to relationships to narratives to resilience. And that's how we keep collective action alive across this spectrum of impact. So I think this was where I was ending, isn't it? Is there another slide next? Yes. So as I invite Mutile to guide us into what we will do next, I think my closing words here is our choice is not which layer is best. That's not the conversation. If you go back to the previous image in the previous slide 24, the work we do requires us to be aware, and what this framework is seeking to do as we even continue to receive feedback on it is to be aware of what the work, where we are working on currently requires us to be, and how we move without losing trust. And in all of this, we as DD and myself as I continue to steward the team, and everyone who's here and the partners and the people that we work with in terms of our associates, our affiliates, a lot of our alumni as well, we are curious learners, and we continue to just reframe through our think tank and our insights hub by co-creating those common glossaries, prototyping some problem typologies, scanning the leverage points. It's something that we are regularly very keen to do. We continue to reimagine through our innovation practice and our think tank, rather our do tank, our lab. We continue to design, to use those design sprints that we find very necessary to develop those common minimum viable protocols and to facilitate, because this is where our role is that of a facilitator, as a neutral facilitator across cross-domain work. And we continue to very actively resolve. And that's why our term is reframe, reimagine, and resolve. With our investment catalysts, our through tank, we are very, very intentional on connecting capital to change and connecting aligning investments with outcome pathways and stewarding those convenings and catalytic moments that make dollars multiply, So I appreciate the chance to share this, and I leave it now to Mutile to guide us on what we will do next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maxi. I would like to invite a few questions, just very briefly for 2 or 3 minutes as we prepare for the breakout room activity. And Wanjiro, if you don't mind refreshing this one with the updated slide. So to the floor, any questions? Please feel free. Yes, Miriam.
Thank you so much, Eric, for the presentation. I don't know if you're able to hear me. Okay, so I'm by the name of Mutesi Miriam, and I work with an organization called Youth Chaperone Uganda. We are currently working under a project which is aiming at influencing policy change. I wanted to just ask, for example, we are working on school re-entry for adolescent girls out of school, and our country has already a guideline that is present, but there are spaces that are missing. And I wanted to know how this movements and networks can really support on that, because we are looking at building a community of practice to trigger, because the area that we are working on is a little bit of a hard one to look at. And my question is here when it comes to, because I believe Kenya has gone a little bit far from ours. You are the pace of dissemination of the guideline. And my question is, how best can movement and networking support us as a youth-led organization? Because most times it's very hard to have a network from other organizations. If, for example, you are youth-led, and most of them look at who has the finances, who has the resources. If you have the resources, it's very hard. But now we have limited resources. How can we get allies to join our call or movement of action? Thank you.
Okay, that's a good question, and it's what we contend with every day. I believe, not as DD necessarily. Yes, we do, but as the people who are in this call, how do we enable the kind of systemic change? Because you're talking about if it gets to the level where it's at dissemination, then the gains are what we are looking at celebrating, and the wins are now around how might we best work in relationship with others. As youth organizations, one of the things that I have found keen to do is just to ensure that we are in the places where we can also leverage expertise from others and also others who have already done this. I think if there is any form of resource, if at all there is a rationalization that needs to be done in terms of what to prioritize, I think the priority often should be how do we bring others that we need into the table, not just about converting the ones who are already converted, others who are needed. How do we bring them into the table? And I think your idea of a COP is really nice, because then you can strengthen the pathway of this policy influence by maybe utilizing a convening, after a convening, maybe ensuring that the convening is designed well enough to and is choreographed in advance well enough to get to particular ends or particular gains, but then being open that when you get into the room in that convenership, anything might happen, and being open to listening and take that and then reuse that to continue now with the work. So my 2 cents, I think I would obviously, Miriam, be happy to engage later or afterwards, but I would imagine there needing to be an asset mapping of what your organization already has and where it can fall within the spectrum, and then looking for where can we leverage others whom we need into that. Mutile, back to you.
Great. I hope that was helpful. Is there anyone else with a question as we step into our breakout rooms? Okay, great. So we have an activity that is going to help us perhaps further contextualize this and let it to sink in. And we have 2 breakout rooms in which we have prepared scenarios of collectivization. The first is about the strain on the Pan-African health ecosystem, and the second is about the evolution of a community learning network. And so the task in this breakout group is to discuss some of the ideas and challenges that happen in collectives and what responses might come out of the group. So there is a facilitator who will be guiding you with some prompts. However, that we are not really looking to get answers to questions. We're really looking to open up a space for thought and for further exploration. So this activity is going to take place on a Miro board, and I've just shared the link in the chat space. So please click on that link and let me know if you're able to access it, at which point each of us will be distributed into a breakout room. So if you're able to access the Miro board, please let me know. I see a few people joining. And the reason I'm waiting is because once we go into the breakouts, it's a bit challenging to share the instructions again. So I'll just give 1 more minute to see if you're all able to go into the room. Okay, I think that's sufficient time. Okay, welcome back. I hope you had an interesting and productive discussion. As we wait for the rest to join. All right. Okay, so most of us are back here. I hope you had a good discussion. We'll just have a very quick report back, 1 minute from group 1 and group 2. And then we have Light Up Impact, who will give us a bit of context about the upcoming last Thursdays in September. So very quickly, Victor, I'll allow your group to go first in 1 minute so that we stay within our time limit.
Thank you. I think Miriam was going to report. Is it possible maybe for them to access the Miro board, just to be able to read out the post-it notes? Miriam?
Yes, Victor, I am able to access the Miro board.
Okay.
Yeah.
The floor
Okay,
is
so
yours.
thank you. From group 2, it was on community learning centers, and our discussion was imagine a thriving network of community learning centers across a region, initially brought together by a shared vision by providing accessible and relevant education to underserved populations. This network, let's call it the Regional Learning Alliance, that is the RAA, was built on a stronger local partnership, volunteer engagement, and a focus on fundamental literacy and vocational skills. Its early success was driven by a clear collective mission and a deep understanding of community needs. So one of the things that we had there is introduction of new technologies, shifting funding. I'm trying to just go through so that I don't go over time.
We only have 15 minutes with a bit more on the agenda, so maybe just the questions that you responded to.
Okay, so question number 1 that we responded to was the challenges and opportunities that are faced by the team in balancing their tradition and community-focused approach, and how best does the Alliance would foster innovation without losing sight of its cause. And I would read just one response there. Set up time and resources to share opportunities and consider guiding the slower to adapt for other organizations to adapt. Become a platform for learning for members. That is, the group should become a learning platform for other members, and then discuss the pros and cons of tech and building a community that needs and collectively advocating for what is best for the community. And for question number 2, I'm just giving one answer for each question. There is often a tension between standardized outcomes and community-driven learning. Consider how the Alliance would define and measure the success in a way that is relevant to the mission. So there success could be measured by sustainability of the Alliance, over a long time without leaving others behind. That means there is teamwork and everyone is moving together. That is aligning their work to the new program, like adapting to the donor needs and a funding environment. Then when it comes to question number 3, was the fragmentation of the Alliance original purpose an inevitable consequence of the changing educational landscape. And here we have developing rules and responsibilities across growth levels. That is division of labor, like everyone having, being responsible of the movement. Then consensus building with members to advocate for what works as opposed to bowing to external factors. And still fragmentation was inevitable since different challenges cause different members to have different priorities. So that was group number 2. That was our response. So back to you, moderator.
Thank you so much. Some really interesting points here about how to ensure you're not leaving other members behind. On our side in group 1, we were discussing the Pan-African health ecosystem, and the scenario was just about how initially this ecosystem was very cohesive, and then several external shocks happened, very similar to COVID and the USAID funding freeze. So our question was, our first question was around, if you are a leader, how would you have tried to maintain collective action amid these pressures? And I think what came out most clearly was that transparency is key in communication. Just talking about what you know and what you don't know in an open way enables a sense of trust to develop. And then we considered around how collectives sometimes move along this spectrum from being an ecosystem towards an entity. It might seem negative, but then there are unintended possible benefits of this. And what we saw as some of those benefits were that there is a better understanding of the local context when you are a smaller organization. And then we talked about how local leadership and community engagement can help ecosystems navigate challenges. And we saw that they can help to pool resources and to conduct research that feeds into the insights that are required to navigate. And that's essentially what we talked about. So I'll stop sharing my screen as I invite Valeria to tell us about the upcoming last Thursdays. Over to you, Valeria.
Hi, Mutile. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So hi, everyone. My name is Valeria from Team Lead from Light Up Impact Kenya, based in Eldoret. It's a pleasure to tell you more about the last Thursday happening on September 25th. Let me give you first a very brief introduction of who we are and why this last Thursday is happening together with Development Dynamics. So Light Up Impact is a movement, and that's why I was particularly interested into the sessions that Development Dynamics has been doing on movements and networks, community of practice. Thank you so much. I've actually learned a lot. Anyway, we are a movement of 100 young visionary grassroots leaders who are fighting for gender, sexual reproductive health and rights, and education justice in East Africa. At Light Up Impact, we enable this movement and grassroots organizations to become sustainable by creating an enabling environment, by being connectors, by being trainers, and by being power shifters. As part of our connector role, every 2 years we organize a conference that this year is happening in October 22nd and 23rd, the third Light Up Impact Days, a 2-day conference bringing together 100 youth leaders and 100 other stakeholders to drive change for youth-led solutions in gender and climate justice. And as we are preparing for this big event, together with Development Dynamics, we will be hosting together on the last Thursday in September a pre-conference event. This pre-conference event will be centered on the concept of funding and visibility of youth-led solution at the intersection of gender and climate. We will have an exciting panel of 3 youth leaders showcasing their innovation, but also the challenges that they have in finding that funding to make it scale or to make it even start. And after that, we will also hear from a multi-sectorial partnership, a multi-sectorial, not partnership, but panel of policymakers, NGOs in the field, and also, of course, funders. What is their perspective? What did they have to say about the issues that the youth leaders are actually going through to make their innovation scale? So I really hope to see you there. It will be an exciting event. And yeah, I look forward to it. Back to you, Mutile.
Thank you, Valeria. We are really excited as well to be partnering with you to put this together. And an open invitation to everyone on the call to connect with the Light Up Impact, find out what they're doing, and also look forward to the conference happening in October. I think we have come to the close of today's session, but we do have a few minutes left. So I would like to invite any reflections, comments, questions, anything as we slowly wrap up.
I think as everybody collects their thoughts, what stood out for me today, especially from MaqC's presentation, is that networks are not static. They tend to evolve with the shifting context and the priorities. Movements also require some intentionality when it comes to trust building, and there has to be some clarity of purpose so that they're able to endure. And as MaqC said, moving from one sphere to the next is not one directional. It's very fluid. But also I think what we should remember is that this movement back and forth can be an organizational strategy. If you move backwards, it should not always be considered as a failure. It should be just like a strategy. Sometimes you have to regroup to be able to move that much further. I think there's a French saying that says sometimes if you want to do a very good long jump, you have to move back so that you can come back and actually perform that long jump. And also across both the networks and the movements, the ability to balance diversity with cohesion is what ultimately will sustain any impact that you might have. So I'm also open to hear what other people think, where they find their organizations or where they find themselves at this particular point.
Thank you. Great reflection there, Victor. And something we are continuing to ask ourselves at DD. Mek, I see your hand up. Please feel free to speak.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Mek Spanda. I'm actually based in Zimbabwe. I'm the founder for Christian Youth Volunteers Association Trust. It was founded in 1995. I'm actually not a youth, but this is a youth-led organization that I founded. What I've realized time immemorial, I feel that the best approach when it comes to youth movements and even for their sustainability, we need to use a youth-to-youth approach where youth can also lead other youth, and also as they graduate from being youth, they need to pass on the baton to the next, perhaps another generation. I also quote a saying that says, where there is a will, there is a way. So such movements, as long people strategize and put contingency plans, I always think that they will thrive. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And I'm also willing to deep dive and cascade this to our youth in my organization and other networks. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mek. Your reflection about passing on information, knowledge, practices to the next generation is particularly important in this moment. And we would be happy to have a conversation with you at some point. I think, Wanjiro, if you can share our contact details, and yeah, we would be happy to talk further on this. Any other reflections? If none, I wish you a very good rest of your day, and we hope to see you next September for the next last Thursdays. Thank you so much, and see you.